Distinguished guests, welcome to this session. In a minute, we'll speak either Chinese or English, so when necessary, would you please use the interpretation device? Thank you. We will start in 1 minute, and after that, we'll start with today's session. Shall we get started?
Now.
Distinguished guests, this is a joint event of Tianjin TV, Phoenix TV at World Economic Forum. My name is Zhang Lijun from Tianjin Broadcasting and TV Station. My name is Sheng-Yang from Phoenix Satellite TV Holdings. Welcome. Indeed, the topic for our session is Global Innovation Outlook. Before we get into detail, I will introduce to you our panelists. First, Mr. Gong, Executive President of Nankai University, People's Republic of China. Next to him is CEO of 1871 of the United States, Ms. Betsy Ziegler. And then Mr. Chen, Chief Technology Officer of JD.com. And last but not least, the Group Chief Executive Communications, Media and Technology of Accenture, Omar Abbosh. Today we're going to be talking about global innovation. Now, since we're talking about outlook, but we need to start with where we are now. We need to think about innovation in terms of technology and so on and so forth. Where we are, where is China? Where is the world? Where are we at the current stage? So I would like to give this question to our 4 panelists. In terms of the trend of global innovation outlook, we'll talk about speed as one perspective. What do you think? Is it developing too fast or too slow? If you think it is too fast, does it mean that we've been ignoring a lot of factors, including values, for example, moral standards? So shall we start with Professor Gong? So we'll give 2 or 3 minutes to each of you, shall we? I know that Professor Gong, now in terms of speed development, you know a lot speed. Yes, you talk about speed in terms of the speed of technological innovation. Now, if we only talk about China, there are several indicators, R&D investment as one. WEF, the World Economic Forum, just released a report in which it says that for the top 10,000 companies that invest a lot in R&D, the number of Chinese enterprises is on the rise. But last year was the first year in which the number goes down for China. What does it mean, Professor? Can I continue? The number of the U.S. companies is going down too. This is not good news for either of these 2 countries. Innovation goes beyond borders. For the rest of the world, the speed is the same. So, another thing I want to mention is that for Alibaba Group, for example, in this report for the first time ranks one of the top 10 in the report I just said, not only in terms of expenditure, but many factors. The top one was Facebook for several times and Intel as well. So Alibaba now ranks among the top 10. I think this is very good news. It means that Chinese enterprises, some of them are one of top 10 R&D investing companies. So it's not a single-dimensional thing of speed. Is it too fast or too slow? It's a comprehensive issue. So shall we see the reason why the number is growing 2 digits in the past, but then it slowed down last year, because much of the investment was done by MNCs, and MNCs in the global landscape plays a major role, including Accenture, for example. Now, economic nationalism is the hot word. In this backdrop, the impact of MNC is going down. So for last year, R&D investment went up for $700 billion. So this was the first time. So overall, the number is going up, but there's a different development from one case to another. As you said, is it an isolated case for next year, for last year, or is it a trend? I would like to give the floor to Betsy now. Why is the name 1870? It is a year, yes, but it was because there was a fire that burned down the city. There was only one fire hydrant left. Is that the case? Is that the case? Now, after 1871, that was the major point. At that time, the most important designers, inventors, all gathered together to redesign that city. So it's like they created a city out of the fire after the fire. Now, it is a Chicago-based incubator, your company.
Sure. Mr. Gong said that speed of investment in R&D has been a dip. Do you agree with that assessment?
Look, I think this is a very complex issue, and I think the answer is very bifurcated. So I think on some companies, you look at the 7 largest companies in the world by market cap, they don't look anything like the companies on the list 50 years ago, and Alibaba and Tencent are 2 of those companies. In my role leading 1871, we've got 500 startup companies operating in our space. And I spent a lot of time talking to the corporate environment in Chicago and in the Midwest. There's 150 Fortune 500 companies in the Midwest, and so I would say that they're moving extremely slow in general. If you look at the companies that are on the Fortune 500, 50% of them have turned over since 2000, and the average duration on the Fortune 500 now is 15 years versus 60 just a handful of years ago. And so there's lots of evidence to suggest that companies should be investing more and be working more quickly and have more of an orientation around embracing the rate of change and the level of ambiguity and the level of complexity that we're all experiencing today. But I don't see it happening nearly as fast as I think is imperative for them to do. And I would argue that the most successful companies in the world are the ones that should be investing the most in this, most in innovation, because once you look at the companies that are actually investing a lot, it's because they've already started to get disrupted. And at some level, that means they're already too late.
Thank you, Betsy. Zhang 总,
Mr. Zhang, the previous 2 speakers said that R&D investment is going down as a trend. Is it the case for JD.com? You're in charge of the R&D team. What is the situation in JD.com? The dip is not the case in the JD.com, and certainly it's not what you want, right? Q4 and Q1 for last year and this year, if you look at the statistics year on year, it's an increase of 80%. So this is not the trend and not the case for JD.com. There are several reasons for this. We need to step back and we look at the era. This is an era of artificial intelligence. We were talking about this back at the stage. That is, the threshold for technological innovation is going down. There's platforms for hardware, software, computing powers. Basic technologies are getting more and more mature, which means it is easier and easier to have technological innovation. But for companies, when they're looking at the application scenarios or their segmented areas of application, this is what the companies need to do right now. You should not push forward technological innovation just for the sake of it. You need to tailor-make it to the scenarios you're working in. Then you will create value. So from our perspective, I think enterprises are getting more and more open, and the result of it is that international cooperation on technological innovation. Accenture is a globally renowned consulting firm.
About innovation over the past years. Okay, you can't hear me.
No, I didn't hear the last part.
Okay.
You might want to repeat your question.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your evaluation about the innovation over the past few years?
If you go back 10 years ago, Accenture talked about the world becoming a multipolar world, which is a recognition of the fact that innovation has many sources from around the planet. So, people talk about Silicon Valley as the place for software innovation. And of course, Shenzhen is the place for hardware innovation. And so the world is more complicated when you look in more detail in terms of where innovation is coming from. On the topic of is R&D spend going down, I mean, of course, in every period of time, you see fluctuation, up and down movements in individual companies. In Accenture's case, we believe very strongly that if you're not investing heavily today, you're compromising growth tomorrow. And so for us, we measure our ability to invest faster than our revenue growth rate each and every year as a way of continuing to innovate and stay on the front foot.
Okay. 刚才呢，4位嘉
Very well. The four of you just gave us a very brief summary of how they look at our innovation in the last several decades. But today, we're here to talk precisely about the outlook of global innovation. So we're talking about future. There are many things we can talk about. We'll go one by one. We'll start with geographic locations. So I'll give the question to Professor Gong first. In your opinion, is there any geographic locations in terms of innovation, which means that the capability of innovation varies from one place to another? Yes, I think so. If you look at statistics, the US, for example, North America, they're always playing a leading role. This is after a long term of accumulation in the Industrial Revolution. They've got technology, human capital, resources, and so on and so forth. And with this is the reality we're having. But if you look at Asia, from 1960s Japan to the 80s, 90s China, with the emerging powers, for the Asia Pacific, they have more and more innovation. Of course, there's a gap. If we compare to the US, you were talking about Silicon Valley. It's a very strong power for innovation. And he also mentioned Shenzhen in Beijing, in Shanghai. There are also places and sources of innovation. Also Tianjin, where we are right now, and Guiyang in the Guizhou province, for example, and Hangzhou as a major city for the source of innovation. For these places, it is now changing the geographic landscape of innovation. But if you look at Southern Hemisphere, there's still a gap. And it's related with the economic power of different countries. We hope that we'll have a balanced picture in the future, but right now there's still a gap.
Wait.
Yes, for the innovation in Asia, I think you're very optimistic, right? I believe Asia's development, taking China and India, for example, we have tremendous potential. And such potential in the backdrop of globalization setbacks might be affected. However, the fundamental motivation and driver is that there's tremendous demand from the people. And the demand is getting stronger. It will not be affected by the trade war.
Sure. I have a question for Mr. Abbosh. Do you agree with Mr. Gong? So we know the Silicon Valley is always the plateau of innovation. So where will be the next Silicon Valley in the future?
Or is Silicon Valley going to retain that leadership position?
So I don't know if you saw the cover of The Economist a couple of weeks ago about startups leaving Silicon Valley, why startups are not in Silicon Valley. Personally, I think that Silicon Valley will retain a very strong position for a very long time, because it's not simply the history, but they bring together the right financial capital, legal expertise, venture capital expertise, as well as all the technologists and scientists and the universities in a complex together that creates an innovation ecosystem that actually is difficult to replicate. And so the sheer track record of success out of Silicon Valley will always attract the next entrepreneur. Having said that, in principle, there's nothing to block any other location from becoming a center of innovation. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen major hubs, as the professor mentioned, in China already. You could see design innovation in Berlin, in Germany. And different cities around the world will always have the possibility to make that happen. I think the trick, however, is that policymakers could take a much stronger role in creating the right environment for education, skills, capital, as well as creating the right rules and regulations to allow entrepreneurs to thrive. And that when you see that combination of things come together, then you get a great ecosystem.
When you say policymaker, are you referring to the current government, the current administration?
Governments and regulators all over the world have a role to play in fostering innovation.
I'm very surprised that you said that 10 years ago, Accenture, which it's Accelerate the Future, has already has already noticed Silicon Valley is the head of the software position. You said that it will maintain because of all those reasons. Of course, you're purposefully omitting high housing costs, but you're saying that it'll retain his position. I think Mr. Zhang Chen will agree with that. But Betsy, do you agree with that? Because as 1871, which only established 6 years ago in 2012, and now today is one of the highest. Its purpose is to support the regional area, Chicago, of course, but also all the startups and all the human resources over there, and it climbed to a position where I don't know if it's overtaken Silicon Valley, but at least it's up there. It's getting there. So how does Chicago do that? And what is your outlook of the future in terms of regional innovation?
Yeah. So there are several points I want to try to connect the dots on. So Silicon Valley is not going anywhere. Let's be clear, right? Silicon Valley continues to be at least the reigning leader in the United States. But I make the argument for the rise of other cities to compete for that, particularly with talent. And so if you think about talent is everywhere. But these cities, if they want to create these ecosystems, they have to invest time, energy, resource, policy, et cetera, in making those things happen. So some number of years ago, just under a decade ago, a number of very influential people in Chicago made the decision that they needed to create sort of a center of gravity for tech entrepreneurs in Chicago. And that's why they designed 1871 to make that happen. They opened the doors, and while construction was going on, entrepreneurs flocked in because they were seeking a place to come together. I mean, one of the beautiful things about Silicon Valley is the community that exists there and allows it to flourish. And so I would argue that 1871 is creating that opportunity for entrepreneurs in Chicago and across the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And with it, we've got 6 venture capital firms that operate out of our space, 7 universities that operate out of our space. And so we're creating that inclusive ecosystem, but it takes a village to make that happen. But I believe that it can be replicated. We're just 6 years into our journey, and Silicon Valley is many decades into its journey.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so from what I look at, I completely agree that the center of gravity, 这个中心啊，宇宙创新中心 Silicon Valley 这个位置很难被取代的。
I think this is hard to be replaced, but it doesn't mean that other emerging cities will not replace Silicon Valley because the innovation threshold is getting lower and lower. If you want to develop an app, you can do the app in Zhengzhou City. You can also do that in many other cities as well. So now the threshold is very low already. You need to figure out the pain point of your users, what solutions you can offer. Now, in the States, I see not only Chicago, but New York, LA, they have a small tech hub, just like China. And China's Silicon Valley will be Beijing. But Shenzhen might also be, and Shenzhen and Hangzhou might also be the innovation hub. So talking about core competitiveness, I think Silicon Valley is the leader, but more other cities are rising because the threshold of innovation is becoming lower, is getting lower. Some people believe it has something to do with location, and some don't think so. So I think location might only be one factor. I think now let's move on to another factor. Do you think are there any specific industry that can create more innovation in the future? I think all the industries need innovation. I agree with Mr. Zhang Chen. what we are seeing right now is internet and software that are experiencing the most innovation. They have gathered a lot of capital and innovation. Part of the reason is because their threshold, their access to innovation is very low. And now that is why they have gathered so many capital and talents. And this is another opportunity for China. But how can this industry be integrated with the manufacturing industry and the real economy so that smart manufacturing can be achieved? And if we can do this, we can create more success. So this, I think we do have such an industry-specific factor, but now we need to break down the barriers of the industry. We need to achieve cross-sectoral innovation, and this depends on digital access and internet coverage and penetration. So you don't think that big data AI will be the pioneer in making breakthroughs in innovation. So you believe manufacturing could also experience breakthrough technologies, right? Yes, AI actually can be applied in all the industries, right? So it's a kind of capability. AI can be applied in different industries and scenarios. Otherwise, it will be useless. Actually, AI is a tool, is a means to an end. And we can see AI everywhere in the future. So, and AI will be forgotten by history. This is a little extreme. I don't think so. But at least we need to leverage the AI capability.
Mr. Gong, in some traditional industries, will there be some disruptive technology to change the direction of this industry? Are you agree?
The answer is yes, but if I can illustrate a little bit. So in the point I was making earlier about innovation is there are different kinds of innovation. So Silicon Valley, let's say, is winning in software. It doesn't mean it'll win in robotics or in genomics. There will be different senses of innovation for different subjects. And in fact, today, if you draw a line that says, what can I get from modern technological innovation, and what are companies using in terms of modern technology innovation, the gap is increasing. There's an increasing gap between what modern technology allows and what companies around the world are leveraging. So in terms of the industrial space, yes, 100%. AI, artificial intelligence, is a term that describes many different technologies. China, for example, has put out 6 times the deep learning patents compared to the United States. So in a particular space in artificial intelligence, which is very important, deep learning, China is already innovating more than in the US. The applications in an industrial context will be enormous across the entire value chain, from design of a product all the way through manufacturing and supply chain, through to in the hands of the consumer. And you asked the question, will AI go away? The answer is no. It'll be pervasive. It'll be in everything. In fact, we already use it in many areas. So, on our smartphones, it organizes our photographs. It proposes music for us to listen to. It controls the anti-lock braking in our cars. So people are using AI already, and it becomes a sort of a seamless, hidden almost utility that's out there helping make lives easier.
Mr. Gong, is there anything you want to say to Mr. Bosch? I agree with him. However, just now he talked about the gap. He said the gap is increasing. I don't entirely agree on that point, because many traditional businesses are proactively applying AI technology. For instance, retail industry used to be very traditional, but they can make very good use of AI. Medical industry, education are also the same. They can also apply AI technology. We do have the gap, but the gap is not necessarily increasing. So, Mr. Zhang, you want to add more? I know you're dealing with the most complex technology challenges. I always say that JD.com might have the widest application of AI in China's internet industry, because all our scenarios have applied AI. Smart consumption, for example, we can we can understand our users better than they do to themselves. Meanwhile, in supply chain and industry chain, we also use AI to accurately tell what kind of products should a manufacturer produce. And we will also tell the store how to order and when they need to order and how much they should order. So we can make the traditional supply chain very smart. So you can see we have the smart logistics. We have drones, our also unmanned store and shops. All of these are AI applications. We have a lot of scenarios. That is why I say innovation need to be scenario specific. And this is very important. We have been improving user experience. The purpose of innovation is not for technology itself. It's about improving user experience and cutting cost and improving efficiency. Talking about innovation and its geographic and sectoral specific application, what is behind is the support of talents and people. So, Mr. Gong, do you think innovative people can be trained? This mindset can be trained? I think a big difference between man and animal is man has creativity. Man creates tools. And we've been constantly developing our capability. And whether this capability can be trained, I think this kind of training is about motivating the creativity and potential of the people so that they can develop their expertise. This is what education and training is all about. So the training of innovative talent needs to be done in a very inclusive and open environment. So this mandatory or rote learning methodology will never work. So that is why America provides a very good environment, and that is why a lot of talents can be created in America, because America offers an excellent innovative environment so that they can achieve diversity and inclusiveness, so different people can develop different potential and talents. So just like Premier Chiang mentioned during the opening, that the innovation and entrepreneurship is very important. Premier Li mentioned that innovation holds the key to future success.
About human resources, we're talking about people. I understand that in 1871, one of its mission statement is to gather people, to work hard, to maybe change the world, to expand your business. But one of them, a key point is to make mistakes. Make mistakes. How big of a mistake how much of a tolerance are we talking about? We talk about burning money, without making mistakes, we're talking about burning more money. How much of a tolerance can innovation take before a company is saying, well, enough is enough, or we have to make that breakthrough no matter how much the cost?
Well, look, I think there's lots of different perspectives on this. I think if you're an entrepreneur here, you measure your success of your day of how many times you failed before lunch or dinner, right? You're always trying new things, you're always pushing the envelope, you're always out there testing things, and you're going to lose more often than you're going to win until you figure that out. I think companies certainly don't have that same risk appetite. So what companies have to think about is what is the combination of inside-out innovation and outside-in innovation that they're willing to combine in terms of their innovation strategy. So when I say outside in, meaning what are your primary pain points? What are the things that you're struggling with? And might there be companies out in the world that are actually trying to solve those problems right now that you could partner with? So instead of making all of the dollar investment in your own company and taking the risk that those aren't going to be successful, maybe you can partner with a company that's already figured that out, young startup company. So there's a lot of this going on right now, certainly in the United States. Some of it has the risk of being a little bit of innovation theater, where the big companies aren't actually totally invested in making a change, but those that are have had enormous success. And if I can just make one other point back to something you said earlier, I mean, I think that if you look at the world today, there's roughly 7.5 billion people on the planet, and 4 billion of those people have access to the internet. Within a handful of years, we'll be at 8 billion people on the globe, and 8 billion people will have access to the internet. And so when you think about that in terms of the growth potential and the innovation required to meet the needs of all of these people around the world, and the fact that all of these folks will have access to education in ways they haven't had before, and access to consumption in ways they haven't had before, I think all of this becomes a much more important problem to solve, and how you connect the dots on investing in talent and driving innovation across the globe to solve the globe's needs.
Betsy, I also want to follow up on your background. Aside from 1871 as a chief officer, also you were, before 1871, you were working at Northwestern as a chief innovative officer for the Kellogg School of Business.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about, in terms of education and grooming the next generation, what kind of a mindset or what kind of a technology that you've instilled in your curriculum that make them better prepared to become better entrepreneurs? And also, going back to the regional difference, maybe in the United States or in Western societies, making mistakes is okay, give it a shot. But in more traditional areas, like say in the Far East and in Asia, they're probably more conservative in terms of when we talk about innovation, we have to look for profit. So what do you say to those more traditional, more conservative entrepreneurs that, sometimes profit is not everything. Sometimes, like you just said earlier, how many mistakes I've made before lunch today. That is how you measure success.
There's a lot of things in that question, but I'll try to remember.
Sorry.
Okay, so I think back to what the professor said, that every industry has to go through this process and go through innovation. I think education is the furthest behind, particularly higher ed education in the United States has not disrupted itself. The classroom looks exactly like it did 100 years ago. Okay. And so I think that there's, so being the chief innovation officer, my biggest job was to try to influence professors to think differently about what their job actually was and how to prepare people for the future that we're now inheriting. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do if they don't believe that their world is going to be disrupted, and most don't. Right? Most feel like, yes, that's happening, but it's happening over there. It's not happening to me. We're protected. We've got a moat around us. It's not going to change. From my perspective, a couple things from the theme of education. First of all, I think there's always going to be a competitive advantage to being a human, right? And so what we have to invest in is a lot of the interpersonal skills that surround the technology. So how do you communicate? How do you do critical problem solving? How do you empathize with other people? How do you influence? How do you collaborate? How do you think about the robot as the team member versus the competitor to you? And when you think about the shift in jobs, autonomous vehicles are going to come, autonomous trucking is going to come. That's 3 million truck drivers in the United States, right? The cashierless retail outlets, well, that's 6% of the employee base in the United States. So how do we think about how jobs are going to shift, how skills are going to go away, and how roles are going to have to be put back together and change, and what is the education required to do that? There is nobody that has figured that out yet. There are a lot of people talking about it. In fact, we've talked about it a lot during this conference, but we're not there yet. The answer is not totally clear. Okay, finally, on the risk appetite on entrepreneurs, I understand your question, and I think it's correct. And when you look at, if you look at cities in cities in the United States outside of Silicon Valley, where the risk appetite of the investors is very different than that in Silicon Valley, where they want to see revenue more than consumer growth before they're willing to invest, right? You have to think very differently about the problem solving. You have to think very differently about how you bootstrap your enterprise until you get to that point where you can produce revenue. It's a longer path, right? So where they're going to get the hockey stick and where they're going to get the scale is probably going to be further out than it is in other areas where on a piece of paper you can get several $1 million in Silicon Valley. That's never going to happen in Chicago.
So what do you have to say to that?
What do I have to say to patience, time. The investor community has to get more comfortable with that level of risk. If we had I think what will happen is if there's a big liquidity event, a big exit of a consumer company in particular in Chicago or any other city that's not Silicon Valley, investors will then, it'll pique people's interest and they'll be more excited about putting money into those cities.
Money will come.
Money will come.
Money will come.
I think I answered everything.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Yes, you remember all. Thank you. Very well.
其实我们的时间真的要
We do need to speed up because we've got very limited time here. We talked about education, talents, nurturing talents, some of the key issues. I have a next question for Professor Gong. Policy making, how do we create this nurturing environment in which people are settled, are very feel safe to innovate? You talked about policy making. There are positive things about policies. Of course, there are issues. Now, in terms of innovation, one obvious issue is that assessment and evaluation is mostly short-term. You talk about speed. That's one proof. We want to see the fruit right now. We talk about tolerance of mistake, but we don't talk about how we tolerate mistakes in terms of policy. So I think too short-termist assessment and government's attitude on this issue, if it is too short-termist, that will slow down in innovation. So I think this is one thing that Chinese people need to change. And the second is you don't have facilitating, supportive, or coordination between different policies. You'll see a gap between one policy and another. So that's conflicting argument or conflicting force among different policies. So I think we need, of course, there are silos of different agencies and departments. This is always a tradition. So when they are together, there's actually conflicting power. So you mean speed is not necessarily better? Because we do have policies with which we allocate resources, and the policymakers are government agencies and authorities. But after the 18th NPC meeting, is that it is said that market should play a dominant role in allocating resources. But one of the resources is human capital. So in terms of allocating human capitals, market needs to play a role. This is something we need to improve. Now, Professor Gong said there are good policies, but it's too short-termist, result-oriented. Mr. Zhang, before you came back to China, you were in the U.S. Did you see the difference between the policies in China and the U.S.? Do you see the restrictions and support, facilitating power of the policies in China? Of course, there are facilitating policies in China, and it makes things very convenient. But from my experience in the U.S., they don't have much federal policies or state policies that dramatically change the picture. Is this the case? In Silicon Valley, JD.com has an institute which attracts about 200 scientists around the world. The reason we are able to attract them is that we do not have policies to help us. The reason we are able to have them in our institute is that we've got world-class problems to solve, and the real talented people, what do they want among all among the time frame, they want to show results with their hard work. What we provide is a platform on which they can solve hard issues like driverless cars, like drones, or the manless cabin, for example. These are world-class problems, and the existence of problems, our platform by nature attracts these talented people on our platform, because the result of innovation is that can you solve anything? The result is not how much money you attract. The money you attract is the condition with which you will be able to solve your problems. So to the end of the day, if you look back, you need to see what is the legacy, what have I done, what problems have I solved. This is the measure for your contribution. The measurement for your contribution. That is, do you have world-class problems, issues, which you with which you provide an opportunity for the talents to show how talented they are. This is very important. And we've seen many talented Chinese people who've been overseas are willing to come back to China to solve these issues jointly, because we've got very interesting problems and issues in China with larger and larger scale. A question for Abbosh in the West. for the risk tolerance, what is the attitude in the West? Risk tolerance.
I think actually probably quite high, but I'll elaborate a little bit. If you think about all technology markets, there is a market adoption curve where for a long time nothing's really being absorbed and then suddenly it takes off until it matures. Big companies operate very well at the top of the maturity curve. And what happens then is they're operating in a big market but with a low cost of capital. When you get a low cost of capital, then actually you don't like failure. And so actually risk tolerance goes down with big companies. Small companies are at the bottom of the S-curve. They're willing to try things out. So for big companies to innovate, they need to develop a culture of experimentation. How do we do experiments in the company to test real ideas with real customers, but without risking the whole company? And secondly, they need to figure out to do what Betsy was saying earlier, which is to reach outside the company into the ecosystem of small companies and learn how to use their innovation and bring it into the company. So I would say successful Western companies have a good risk tolerance, but it's always, they still have to deliver their financial results. So that's, the rules of business haven't changed. They're the same rules.
Interesting. 其实我想加一句，
I want to add that mistake is the parent, the mother of success. This is an old Chinese idiom, and I think this is very appropriate to say that even at this time and age in a modern society. So if when we do investment, is it better? The more the better. Well, I'm a researcher. Of course, I want as much money, resources as possible. In China, we say any problem that can be solved by money is not a real problem. So is money a problem? Well, I think money is, of course, an issue. We've got an increase of investment of R&D. In China, that is true. Last year, Alibaba ranked for the first time among the top 10 R&D company with $1.5 billion of investment in R&D, which means if you look at Amazon, which tops the list, the number is 16 billion. The additional part is 3.6 billion between 2017 and 2016, which was more than the total amount of investment of Alibaba in 2017. So the goal you set for yourself is higher, then you need the more financial resources you need to invest in. So for China, we need to, aggregately speaking, increase the R&D investment, because now it only takes about 2% of our GDP. We have very high goal for our innovation. So now the number is still low. What is the number? I think 4% is a reasonable number. So there's still a huge gap to meet. If we combine BAT, these three companies, the number is still lower than Microsoft, for example. But it's not only about monetary resources. You can't waste all your resources. Efficiency is also very important. Now, how do we approach this issue? Mr. Zhang said we need to solve the issue. It is a solution-oriented attitude. Of course, we need to publish papers. This is good for academic world, of course, but academic articles, journals are not enough. We need to create solutions, real solutions for real scenarios to increase quality, to increase efficiency, and to increase value. This is something that solution-oriented is good.
Say whatever can be solved with money is not a problem. And Mr. Gong refuted that, saying, no, money is still the problem. Is money a problem too in the United States of startups looking for venture capitalists, looking for money? Is that, in terms of investment, is that still a problem that you want to shout out?
Yeah, look, I think that for the most part in the United States, there's plenty of capital going into startups. It's not clear that it's allocated to the right startups all the time. So I think if you're an individual company, so I traveled with a handful of startups from 1871. They might disagree with me on this, right? But in aggregate, I think there's plenty of capital in Chicago and outside of Chicago. I think it's just a question of who gets it and under what terms do they actually get it.
其实我插一句，其实在这个硅谷，我至少按照我的。
I think in Silicon Valley, as far as I know, the fundraising is much easier than in China. And also the cost of fundraising is also lower, and that is why it's easier for them to gather talents.
So, Mr. Abbosh, what's your attitude toward the investment in innovation?
I mean, to put it very simply, if I'm spending more on innovation wisely, then I'm going to have a better future. If I'm not spending, then I'm going to have a less good future. I mean, it literally is as simple as that. The evidence of human history and the global economy is that the companies, the entities, the countries that have invested in innovation are essentially investing in differentiation for the future. If you're not investing, then you're standing still. But of course, the world is moving. And so that means you're going behind. You know, I believe very strongly that the best companies are always investing at scale, and the professor gave the Amazon example. Amazon run 1,000 experiments a year, and they have an agreement with their investors that allow them to spend at a certain rate that is just incredible, and it means they're constantly innovating and finding new markets that just give them incredible growth in the future.
刚才很多嘉宾真的谈到说，在创新领域投入的资金财力越多越好。
And just now you mentioned that the more you invest, the better. So is innovation, do you think is there any boundary for innovation when it comes to, you know, national security or ethics or morality? Should we avoid such areas? I don't think boundary, I think, yes, this kind of boundary is very important. And talking about AI, and last year, we published the guidelines for AI development in China. So AI has both social and technical nature. So we have to pay attention to ethics and morality. In July, in Stockholm, in Sweden, during an exhibition there, the universities, enterprises, and other stakeholders during that exhibition signed a joint declaration. That is, they will not produce man-killing machines. So this is a commitment by the industry and academic circle. So AI have to keep such boundary. All the scientific research need to be real. No counterfeit is allowed. And in the meantime, we need to be kind. We need to ensure that the technology is good to mankind. And for AI and engineering, I think this kind of ethics and morality boundary is very important. So speed is important, but efficiency and responsibility is all the more important. And we also have this responsible innovation. Any more comments? I think innovation has to be scenario specific. It's not that you can, you know, apply any technology and then value will be created. It's not the case. You need to think about what benefit can be brought to the users through the innovation. So sometimes the innovation may be very low efficient because it fails to address the pain point and challenges. And by using drones, we want to improve the logistic efficiency. And this is a very important challenge. And if we can address this issue, we can create value to society. Therefore, we have this scenario. And when you have a lot of money and you want to do something, but you didn't think clearly what problem you want to solve, we need to avoid such situation. You talk about drones and autonomous driving, and so without human driver, it's the machine that will determine whether this car will hit a person, will hit a tree. So what is your prediction?
Is there innovation? Is there a boundary with innovation?
So you know, again, if you look at the entirety of human history, you'll see that we've always allowed innovations to come in, and in general, they've improved our lives, overwhelmingly so, in the sphere of machines that carry loads instead of human beings, in terms of the healthcare and medicine. The modern innovation has always helped us. So of course, when people hear about artificial intelligence, which is a difficult phrase, people feel fear. I'm a believer that, as I think was mentioned earlier, markets are still the best way of allocating resources. But every well-functioning market operates to a set of rules. And those rules need to be established. And in the sphere of AI, ethics is very important. And we need to remember always that every technology is only there for people. The purpose of the technology, the purpose of the innovation is for human beings. It's not for something else. So as long as we design our technology with a human-centric approach that's thinking about why we're doing this, who is it for, then we can avoid AI algorithms that disadvantage some part of the population for their healthcare insurance versus others. You can prevent having AI algorithms that send the police after one individual because of the color of their skin versus others. And these are sorts of things that we have to, as long as we have an open discussion around the ethics, around the purpose for the human beings, then we can define the right rules and regulations around these markets so that they operate in the right way.
Betsy, something
Betsy,
to add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there could be lots of unintended consequences, right, by moving too fast, which is what everybody has said here. I'll just use another example. So autonomous transport, you made the comment that we're trusting the machine not to get in an accident with anybody. I think the other way to think about autonomous transport, because it's quite exciting and I think it's quite energizing for lots of us, is that there are more than 30 companies that are building autonomous vehicles right now. And so it could become this massive nightmare when you've got 30 different companies or 300 different companies putting autonomous vehicles on the street. So we end up having more cars on the street than we do currently, right? It could like swing the other way if we don't have some regulations, some policymakers, some set of very rigorous debate about what choices we're going to make at the city level, the state level, the country level, et cetera.
Thank you. We have about 我们大概还有8分钟的时间，我想把
We have about 8 minutes left, so I think I'll open the floor to the audience. I see a gentleman raising his hand. So now, is the microphone working? Please speak to the microphone. Yes, I want to ask Mr. Gong. I'm from Nankai University, so we went to the same school. So you spent many years serving as the president of Nankai University. Just now we talk about people and talents. So people become more important in the era of AI. But when we think about another perspective, if you want to train the talents that is suitable for AI, what kind of education shall we provide? So I wonder, how shall we teach these students so that they can be prepared for the future AI development? So about the talent training, to answer it in a simple manner, across the world, we have a severe lack of people. We do have a tremendous shortage of talents. This is especially the case in China. At least 26 universities, including Tianjin University, Nankai University, established an AI institute to train AI talents. And this is necessary. However, this is far from enough. In the AI age, the role of people have changed. We used to be very good at memory, but now our memory cannot beat machines. Our algorithm also cannot beat machines. So now we can discover problem and figure out issues. And this is what we are good at, and we need to change our original teaching pattern. Right now, I think our existing teaching system was designed for the age of industrialization. However, with AI development, I think a lot of the new areas will emerge, and our original teaching methodology need to be changed. And second, the people need to take initiative to learn. They must want to learn. I think one president mentioned that education is not about is about inspiring the enthusiasm and initiative of people to learn by themselves. It's about igniting a fire. So we have to recognize our shortcomings and the weaknesses we need to change. Any more questions? Okay, the lady in the second row. Please use the microphone.
The JD CTO, looking forward in 10 years, what will be the world look like with the technology of AI, including the self-learning AI? What's your prediction?
Okay, I can predict from JD's perspective. I said JD's technology map is really involve smart consumption, smart supply chain, and smart logistics. For people can see is that I can really see by you're saying 10 years time that our really JD's effort to really make last mile delivery more efficient means the drones, the delivery robots. Just imagine there's millions of delivery robots on Chinese street, and any one of them is only a few hundred meters away from your house. Right? That ability is open to anyone, all the merchants, be able to tap into the last mile, we call the retail as a service. That is tremendous, right? I think that's also part of just people coming to China, see the mobile payment. People are amazed. I hope JD can bring that, last mile delivery that modern society should have, be part of the technology advance that people see.
好，
刚刚好像还有一位先生，还有时间一个问题。
Do we still have time for one more question? Yes, final one. Okay, let's turn it over to the gentleman.
We have seen more and more countries are making their cybersecurity law, including like data protection and privacy. The typical example is European Union's like a GDPR. So that kind of a regulation seems to be prohibit free data flow and collecting personal information globally. So do you think that will impact the innovation negatively or positively? Thank you.
Will it become a hindrance? Is this question directed to JD?
To everyone.
Anybody?
To everyone.
Accenture.
Sure.
Yeah.
Naming names.
So I mean, it's not a secret that after 30, 40, 50 years of globalization, the political sphere is seeing in some places deglobalization. And in fact, we measured all the laws and regulations passed by countries in the OECD countries from the financial crisis to today. And there are more than 1,500 new measures that increase what we call digital fragmentation. So GDPR and e-privacy regulations are part of that, where it just actually is harder to move information across border, to move IT services across border, and to move technologies around. So will that hinder innovation? I mean, it makes life harder, but big corporations, they deal with that. And we talk to all of our clients, CIOs and CTOs, and they all have strategies in place for how they manage the innovation process within the new rules, if you like. So I don't think it'll create a long-term disruption, but I think every country or policymaker that puts these rules in place has to think about the unintended consequences for innovation for their own national champions and for their own companies.
好，今天呢，我们在场上。
Very well. We've been talking about innovation outlook. We talk about talents, resources, capitals, and mechanism policies, so on and so forth. So for the last thing for this session, one sentence for you to recap today's talk, starting from Abbosh. 创新 在世界上任何地方都很重要，中国在许多地方都起到了引领作用。创新 对于社会前进非常重要，无论有多大的挑战都要应对。创新是全球的，机会是全球的，我们需要共同的来解决全球问题。We need to use innovation to serve sustainable development, and you need to do this through reform and opening up. And this is the 40th years of anniversary of reform and opening up. This is very relevant and timely. For the past several thousands of human civilization, we've never stopped in terms of exploring the unknown, and will still be the trend in the future. So when we are pushing forward the innovation, we'll of course have a better life.
Omar， 感谢大家，谢谢大家参加今天论坛，
谢谢大家，
谢谢几位，
也感谢。
Thank you very much.